Hi, everybody. Sorry if I'm a little bit late. This was a little bit hard to do, apparently. And it's also only my second ever live, so it's not exactly my comfort zone sitting here. So, thank you. I just want to start with saying that this is very difficult to do. And I really appreciate everybody who's joining in. And I just want to start off by saying that I'm really scared. And I might not be as eloquent as maybe you might be used to. So please bear with me on that. I'm going to try my best. I'm going to try my best not to have that squeaky, voice that happens when you cry too. So I'm here with Obama. I thought it was a really good backdrop for everything that's happening in the world today. And I really, really appreciate all the messages that I've been getting over the last few days in regards to the posts that I've been making. And it's really been fantastic because what I've been getting a lot of is a lot of people asking a lot of questions. And these questions are really honest and open and vulnerable. People owning their white privilege to me and saying that they want to know how to do better, but they just don't know how. Or people asking what would be perceived as like ignorant questions, but really it's not ignorant in the way that maybe it's being portrayed as. It's ignorant and just not knowing. And I love this. And I know that when you often come out and you say things and you ask questions that are perceived as ignorant, that you might get attacked. And I know that that makes it very hard to find out the information that you want to know. But this is because racism as a whole concept is so multi-layered. It's not something that just fits inside of a box. And I feel like trying to understand it, we all want to fit it inside a box. But that's not how it works. It's actually quite layered, and it's layered in systems that we've been living with. It's layered in the laws that were created with supremacy in mind and racial hierarchy in mind. These are where our laws came from. They didn't come from equality. They came from letting certain people of certain wealth and certain skin color to remain in power. Those laws were never there to provide for us or to give back to our communities ever. They were never created for that. So this is why racism is a problem. It's so layered, and it's really hard to just lump into one. Well, what can I do? What is the one thing I can do? There isn't really one thing to be done. There's many things to be done. And there's many things to be done by all of us. I speak to my fellow Indigenous. We have to get over our pain. We have to get over our pain because it's the only way that will allow the Caucasian population to join us. We create our own roadblock when we prevent them from growing and learning and owning up to their mistakes that they've made to us. I know it's harder to do than what I'm just suggesting because the pain is so real, and it's not from yesterday, it's from today. And I know that myself, I am guilty of hurting loved ones with comments that I have made. I've hurt my friends who are Caucasian, and I've seen that hurt. And I just can't apologize for it. And the reason is I was speaking my truth, and my truth came out of pain. The thing I will apologize for is for letting it manifest itself in anger towards you instead of compassion. But the message was still the same. And the pain that you felt wasn't just because my words cut. They hurt you because you understand that there is truth there. And you understand fundamentally that there is something that you are doing to contribute to it. It's the guilt of racism. Racism is a funny thing because it makes you believe that it's a bad thing. Only bad people are racist. But that's just not true. We all are racist. We're all racist because we all grew up in the systems that were designed, again, to keep rich and white people on top. They brainwashed all of us to believe in it. I believed in it. I grew up believing in it. And I know that Muslims and Black Americans and Black Canadians, they know what I'm talking about. We grew up understanding that our race was shameful. That it was something that we were to be ashamed of. I am ashamed that I felt shame because my father was First Nations. I think back to being a little girl in grade 3, and I have this is a very vivid memory. And that's the thing about racism also. These memories remain vivid. They don't go away with time. And I remember my dad came to class for Parent Day. And it was probably one of the first times that I really understood that I was meant to be ashamed of him. When I was that young, my father looked extremely Indigenous. He had very long black hair. He wore them in braids all the time. We were raised in our culture. My father was raised in his culture. So, we're culturally proud. And when I was in grade 3, there was a lineup of parents, and I don't know if it seemed to be a lot of dads, so maybe it was a dad thing, but all I remember is I just didn't want him there. I didn't want him there. And it wasn't because I didn't want him there to be there for me. I didn't want him there because I knew that I was going to get bullied. That people were going to understand that I was First Nations. And that I wasn't going to be seen or perceived the same way. I understood that, and I didn't understand that only because that was what white people presented to me. I understood that because that was what was told to me to protect me. I was told by my own people that in order to stay safe, I had to also remain quiet. And when I witness what's going on right now in the United States of America with the Black Lives Matter movement, I have no choice but to stand in complete solidarity and understanding with them. Because when they speak, if I close my eyes, I don't see them as Black because their stories are my own. And when I say that, I often end up with a ton of racial backlash. And I find it interesting because it's mostly Caucasians that call me out and tell me that this is not my time, that I'm stealing the Black Lives Matter movement. You know what? Fuck that shit. This is not one box where Black people got racism and then tomorrow Indigenous got racism, the next month it's Muslims, and the following month it's Indo-Canadians. Like, racism is a daily thing. The only reason that we are minorities is because they lumped us separately. Why do white people get to be all lumped together? If we all lumped ourselves together as brown-skinned people, we would be the fucking majority. And instead, we sit back and we let them call us minorities. We're not minority. We are most likely the majorities of the world. Europe is tiny, may I remind you. White is not a race. White is not a culture. Being Swedish is a race. Being German is a race. White is not a race. I am Wet'suwet'en. That is my race. My mother comes from Caucasian background of French, Irish, English, all the Caucasians, and Mohawk. Those are cultures. Don't tell me that white is a culture. Don't tell me that white lives matter. Don't tell me that all these things, you don't get to tell me that. And you want to know why? Because racism is about the fact that there is one sector of the population that is allowed to oppress another. I can't be racist against you because I can't oppress you. That is the difference. You can oppress me. I've been oppressed my whole life. And you know what? When I say that to people, do you know what every time, if there is a white person in the conversation, every time, they are going to say this to me. And I have to yield this kind of comment in my chair as a hairdresser, in my professional life, and every single day. This is what I hear when I say I've been oppressed my whole life. Oh, come on now, Amber. But look, you've had a lot of success. You've had a lot more success than a lot of people. Well, thank you so much for acknowledging that. What you're not acknowledging is the amount of work I had to do to get there. The amount of covert racism I had to experience every day or every week or whatever on the regular. And during those covert racism moments, I'm expected to remain calm, not react. Because if I react, I'm not going to get cast in that next show. No, forget it. Amber's no longer on stage. Because that's a thing. That's what happens. Because I'm not, I'm ruffling some feathers. I'm making people upset. That's not okay. Well, you know what's okay, not okay? Making me upset. Why is it okay to make me upset? Why is it okay to make that black woman upset or that Muslim person who wants to wear her headscarf upset and when you tell her that she doesn't have the right to do that because she's now in America? Or why do you get the right to hurt that person by saying that they should speak English because they're in Canada? What? No, you should be speaking Wet'suwet'en, bitches. So, the next thing that happens when we talk about racism is, oh, Amber, come on, you guys just got to get over it. That's so much in the past. No, it's not in the past. And actually, it just happened in April. And this piece of news did not even hit mainstream Canadian media. We had 3 First Nations individuals killed by police officers in Winnipeg, Manitoba in April 2020 in the matter of 10 days. These were unarmed individuals. One was 16 years old. So I just want to say their names because I really think that, as we're yelling out George Lloyd, which is like, rest in peace, George Lloyd, and may your life have purpose. I also want to share with that shout out, Aisha Hudson, age 16. Jason Collins, age 36. And Stuart Andrews, age 22. My heart goes out to their families and friends and loved ones who unfortunately have to see their loved one shot and killed by police officers in Canada, the land of their ancestors, and know with certainty that there will be no justice served there. They also have to know that people in Canada don't give a shit. People in Canada do not give a shit about First Nations lives. We have thousands of murdered and missing women, and they have never even been investigated. How? How do so many people go missing and we don't even look for them? How does so many women in one small area of British Columbia, so notorious that they've named it the Highway of Tears, how do so many women get killed and murdered there? And there isn't a national manhunt. And instead we do an inquiry. And that inquiry says, Canadians are racist against First Nations people. And all that happens is Canada goes, oh, maybe that wasn't exactly accurate. I don't know if I like that word, genocide. Maybe some people need to go back to school and understand that word, because it's not one that's owned by the Jewish. It's owned by the people who perpetrate racism at a systemic level. This isn't something that is owned in the past. It's something that is happening in current day. Donald Trump didn't make racism happen. Donald Trump took the freaking lens off of it. And, you know, we can hate him all we want, but maybe this is good. We need this. We need an uprising. And I don't mean an uprising. I'm not calling for civil war. I'm not calling for, you know, people to do bad things in order to make us be heard. I really wish that that didn't have to be the case. But in the United States of America, that is the case. They have to. They have no choice. They've tried it the peaceful way. And here's the thing. Every time I watch those videos about, you know, you see these peaceful protests and they start to amplify. And then I watch the peaceful protests that we've had in Canada amongst the First Nations, as well as the distracted. Thank you, Naza. Sorry, totally got distracted there. Big topic, a lot of stuff going on in my mind. So yeah, back to the Black movement in America. They have no choice but to do that. They've tried the peaceful way. And I've tried to think about how come in Canada we were able to shut down Canada with our First Nations protests before COVID-19. And we didn't have this situation of such extreme violence. So I started to really look at what was happening down there. And what I recognized was it's about the police. Plain and simple. If you go to a protest in Canada, you'll see our RCMP and they'll be in riot gear and they'll be standing there and they're like all lined up, but never do I feel like they're there to hurt me or that I'm at risk. Interesting, right? And I think it's because of the mentality of the police force. I think the RCMP is trained that they are peacekeepers, that they are there to secure the peace, that they understand our fundamental rights to protest, and that is their job to maintain that fundamental right for us. Not to say that we don't have our own policing issues. I did just talk about that, but it's certainly not like the same policing structural issues that they seem to have in the United States of America. So down south, the police, what I've noticed is there is a lot of cities not having riots. And if you look at those cities, those police officers are out there hugging, they're taking a knee, they're showing support. And then you see the riot cities, and what did I see? I saw police starting the fight. And when you were a kid and people got into fights at school, what was one of the determining factors of who got in trouble first? It was who threw the first punch, right? So if police officers are showing up to protest thinking it's a war, or they're going there like they're about to have a gang war, then what do you think is going to happen? And if that's what happens every single time a Black person tries to protest in the United States of America, do you think that maybe now they might be also preparing for that? However, they're not. And do you want to know why? Because this is one of those subtle parts of racism. The thing about being one of the minorities is this: we're trained. Do you want to know what we're trained in? We're not trained to fight. We're trained to be subservient. We're trained to toe the line. And we're trained to definitely not do what I'm doing and speak out. Because we don't want or need to have more racism cast on us. I don't need to act out and then they go, see, there they are acting out. That's exactly what's going down in the United States of America. Oh, see, those thugs down there, they're causing some shit. This is why police have to shoot them. What? Seriously? And this is, again, the multi-layers of systemic racism. So if you're Caucasian and I speak to you about something you did that is racist, I'm not saying that you're a racist, because I personally have a very clear understanding that you are conditioned to this. But I need you to also understand that you're conditioned to this. Because once you understand that you're conditioned, then you can start to do the work to unravel that conditioning. But if you can't even own the fact that you might actually have a little bit of ingrained racism, then I'm never getting to you. And you're never going to stop being racist. And no matter what your good intentions are, you're just never going to. And so if you're a Caucasian person and you're wondering what it is that you can do, well, number one, you can start by asking questions. And I know that sounds really easy, except that that's not actually the way things go. Because how people mostly come at me are, oh, Amber, you know what you should do? Oh, please tell me, should I have been born white? Is that what you're going to tell me? Because that's really the only opportunity that this is going to change for me. Or, they start to talk about all the things that as a culture we should do, what we should all do differently. No, you know what? Here's the thing. The problem with that philosophy that you hold is that it puts the onus on us to stop the racism. And here's the thing with that. Racism isn't actually an indigenous problem. Racism is not a black problem. It's a problem that we personally have to deal with. But it's not a problem within our cultures. It's a problem in white culture. It's your problem. The crack is in your culture. You need to fix it. We can't fix it for you. We can shine a light on it for you, but I can't fix it. You need to fix it. You need to call out your fellows, white people. You need to call them out. You need to stop covert racism, because this is the problem. When I speak about racism, I'm very rarely speaking about overt racism. Those really bad ones, because those are the ones that you think I'm talking about. And that, I'm going to urge any Caucasians to really do their research on the difference between overt racism and covert racism, because covert is what I deal with every day. Overt racism is what I don't deal with every day. And the difference for me personally, as a person of color, is that overt racism is easier for me to deal with. And the reason is that when somebody is overtly racist to me, anybody watching would happily clap and cheer me on for giving it to that person. Because it's so overt. That guy is a bad person. Bravo, Amber, way to go. Yay, you did such a brave thing. But the covert racism, that's the stuff that I have to deal with all the time. That's the stuff that has me at photo shoots discussing something and my race comes up and suddenly, there's a white guy looking up at me and going, oh, don't worry about that, Amber. Can't even tell. Oh, I'm sorry. Was I supposed to be worried about that? Am I supposed to be ashamed about it? And if I looked like it, would that be different? Interesting. Or it's the type of racism that happens when you don't know what race I am even. That, or when you tell me that you don't see color, or when you tell me that you have a token black friend. Because let me talk to you about that token friend of yours. The fact that you even use them as a token is racism. That is covert racism to the max. We are not here to be your mascot. I am not your token. If you are my friend and you have ever thought to use me as your token to prove you're not racist and you did not check with me first, then you do not get to use my words to prove you're not racist when someone of color is telling you that you are. I do not give you permission to do that. You can ask me to use my words if you are trying to push forward anti-racist conversation, but you are not given permission to use my words to push back to prove that you are not racist. I also wrote some notes so that I could, it's again, just a complex situation. So I just wrote some notes to make sure I didn't miss any points that people were asking me about. So something that, because, you know, this is a conversation that's being had because of the Black Lives Movement, or Black Lives Matter movement. Something that I get a lot of questions or mostly judgments on is the fact that this is a Black Lives Movement matter and not a First Nations. And I really have to, again, stress that racism is racism. And I'm sorry, but we all stand in this together. And the reason that I can say that is because I actually understand them. And this is another really fundamental thing for anybody who doesn't experience racism to contemplate, is there is empathy and there is understanding, and they are not the same thing. As a Caucasian person who has zero, with exception to anybody who has other oppression in their life, like LGBTQ, you don't actually get to say that you understand where I'm coming from. You can tell me that you're empathetic and you can be empathetic, but unfortunately you will never, but fortunately for you actually, unfortunately for us, you will never be able to understand. You won't be able to understand because to have understanding takes experience, and you can't experience it. So you can have understanding. And I know this personally was somewhere, it was a conversation I had with one of my very best friends. And I know I heard her when I told her that she couldn't understand. And she said to me back, I have empathy. And that's true. She has empathy, like to the buttload. But she can't understand racism. However, as an Indigenous Canadian, I can understand what Black people go through in America. And I can understand it because we experience it in Canada. And Muslim people, they can understand what First Nations people go through in Canada. Jewish people can understand what we go through in Canada. But white people, you can empathize only. So please refrain from using these terms about understanding. You don't understand. You can only open your hearts and your minds to empathize with what we're trying to say to you. Because here's the thing. When I say that their stories sound like mine, I'm just going to share a few ways that so that you can understand. Because one of my other good friends made me realize that I talk sometimes like you should, that you have the same knowledge I do. So I'm just going to share it with you. So let's talk about Black people. Do you know why people are called Black in America with a big capital B? Because that is now their culture. It is their culture because they were actually stolen from their land in Africa and brought over to America to be slaves for Caucasian people, for European settlers. And they can't, because they were taken from their lands, they no longer even know where they came from. They don't know if they were from Kenya, South America, Tanzania. They have no idea because they were stolen and their records weren't brought and nobody gave a shit about their history. So they became a culture unto themselves in America. That's why we get to call them black people. But that doesn't mean you get to call Asian people yellow or other people this or da. Okay? We call them black people because colonizers stole them from their lands and put them in America and stole their culture. Okay? Did you hear me? Colonizers stole black people from their lands, enslaved them, and stole their culture. First Nations of North America. European settlers came and stole our land and stole our culture and tried to beat us off our lands and kill us off of our lands. They tried to kill us off of our lands. So do you tell me that those are not almost identical stories? But what they are is they're the same perpetrator. And that's why I get to understand them. And that's why I get to speak out too. I get to speak out because their perpetrator is the same one as mine. Their cultures were stolen just like mine, and I identify with that, and I get to identify with that because I am 44 years old. And as a 44-year-old First Nations Canadian, do you know what that means? That means I don't know my First Nations language. That means that I'm of the population that our culture was almost completely annihilated. And if it wasn't for recent developments trying to get the youth to understand our cultures again, would we even be where we are today? Okay, because my generation is the one whose complete identity has been stolen. We're the generation that came from residential school grandparents. Residential school grandparents bred parents that took us off res and they put us into education systems and we were colonized. I am a fully, completely colonized First Nations person. Thankfully, my grandparents were also extremely cultural and I got my cultural training that way. But aside from that, I am colonized. Okay? Like, I work for, in the city, you know, all that stuff. So, my culture was stolen. Again, only because my grandparents worked so hard to make sure that I maintained it, that, you know, but my younger cousins, like, due to all kinds of other issues in our family, I have family members, including my siblings, that don't know our culture. So, like, again, black people, stolen from their lands, culture stolen from them, enslaved and brought to America. Indigenous people, land stolen from us, tried to kill us off our lands and stole our culture. So yes, I do. I get to empathize. I get to understand them. And I get to speak out about this topic. And that's why. We also experience the same things in modern days. So, like, again, for any of those haters that want to talk about the fact that, like, that was all a long time ago. No, it wasn't. It was not a long time ago. In the history of the lands, it was definitely not a long time ago. But in the history of today, it's still fucking happening. Okay? Black man killed in America. Indigenous youth killed in Canada. This happened just in the last 6 weeks. So, like, what do you expect? But we also have unequal education opportunities. So you go to any ghetto in the United States of America, and what do you see? You see broken down schools. You see the worst teachers of ever. You know, they never get the best of anything. Same with First Nations in Canada. Here's something that a lot of people don't know. Did you know that most reserves in Canada are remote and a lot of them don't actually even have road access? Did you also know that most of them have infrastructure that looks more like a third world country? Because I've had the privilege of traveling, I mostly travel to third world. And when I make that comparison, I don't make it lightly. Reserves in Canada look like third world countries. Why are Canadians okay with the fact that there are Canadians, not just Canadians, the originals, the OGs of Canada, the people who've been here for thousands of years, living in third world conditions. Why are Canadians okay with this? And then you ask yourself, when you listen to me say this, there is third world conditions that our Indigenous are living in. And if you are Canadian and you do not live in these kind of conditions, I ask you to just sit on that. Sit on it just for one moment. Think about that. We live in a first world country and we have towns. These are towns. These are villages. A reserve is a village, okay? So just consider it. We have villages that are third world conditions. And you're going to tell me that that is not something to get outraged about? That isn't something that all Canadians should be flipping their lids about because it's against our freedoms and our charter? And then you expect that you treat us like this. You treat us and you treat the people down south, the Black people and the First Nations in the U.S. like this, and you expect us to have respect for authority? And like and I want you to just think again about this third world country in a first world country. Can you actually look at yourself and say that that isn't racist? Truly. This has been going on for hundreds of years. In 2020, we have our founding members, our founding human beings of this part of the planet living in third world conditions while everybody else lives in a first world. In one of the most rich first world countries there is. And you're going to tell me that that's not racist? And then you're just going to be quiet about it probably too. So the other thing about reserves in Canada is this. Most children in reserves, if they're remote, only receive grade 8 education. What is an entire community to do with a grade 8 education? How are they supposed to rise and be even just good members of society with a grade 8 education? Do you know statistically also, by the way, and maybe this is kind of in a weird way beneficial to our population growth, but because we have gone from 4% to 5%. But did you know that teenage pregnancy is highly increased if education stops at grade 8? Did you know that if we just educated children until grade 10, that they would stop having babies in teenage life? And not to say that like it doesn't happen and kids don't get to grade 12 and have babies as teenagers. It's just that like they drastically go down. So, you now have people who are poor. You've put them in slums or reserves because tell me, what is the difference between a slum or Compton in LA and any reserve in Canada? Nothing. They put us into one place so that they could maintain us. They caged us up. They said, you belong here. You can come out into the rest of society, but only if you behave yourself. And you'll notice First Nations and Black people are super well behaved actually, because again, we were trained to be. It's cultural for us, but it's also something we were trained. I was told as a youngster to behave myself in a certain way because I was going to be racially charged anyways, right? So if you have people who have only a grade 8 education and they're poor on top of that, so they can't even try to like buy education for themselves, and then you put them in the middle of buttfuck nowhere and you gave them nothing and you make them super dependent on the government, which by the way, the government funds that go to First Nations in Canada is not actually taxpayers' money. It comes from a trust fund that was put out when the Constitution was signed. That trust fund was put aside because of a treaty. And that treaty did not say we give up our lands to Canada. That treaty said we can all live here together, that the settlers could have their own ruling governance and we could move along amongst them. That was what was decided. And that is how come, as kind of like, I guess, rent, I don't know, that's just my interpretation of it, a trust was started. Now that trust over the years has actually been invested. It's even been borrowed on by the government of Canada and is rumored at being in the trillions. It's held by the Queen. So for whatever reason that is. So if this trust fund is dating from way back then, none of your taxpayers' money is going into any of the funds that goes to First Nations in Canada. And then this brings me to this. If that is rumored to be in the trillions, and we have a serious water problem on First Nations reserves in Canada, to the point that an entire generation has grown up, like a 25-year-old person in a reserve in Ontario, Northern Ontario, has actually grown up never being able to drink the water or shower in the water. It's not just undrinkable. They can't even shower in it. Their whole life. Somebody in Canada has never been able to drink the water that comes out of their tap or shower in the water that comes out of their shower. Because it's not good. Because they'll get sick. Wrap your brain around that. And estimates are about $1.4 billion to fix all reserves in Canada, to have good drinking water and water you can wash and bathe in. And we don't have the money for that, apparently. Yet the First Nations Trust Fund is in the trillions. So that only tells me that we need to ask where that money is actually, because I have a feeling that that money is tied up. That money that is not for the government of Canada is being tied up by them so that we can't have access to it. And what are they using it for? Are they borrowing from it again? So as a Caucasian, the one thing you can do is anytime that you ever hear about how First Nations live off our taxpayers' money and we keep them alive and you can actually, let me just give you a little bit of Canadian history, okay? This is how you help the racism. This is how you do it. By educating, by stopping your fellow white people from saying stupid shit like that. And again, look up covert racism, because that's the stuff you need to stop. You need to stop the covert stuff. You need to stop someone from saying, yeah, but Amber, you're successful. All that means is that I just put up with a lot more shit getting there. That's all that means. And then you go, okay, so we talked about education. We talked about how they've suppressed us and how they've put us all like either into ghettos or slums or reserves, however you want to call it. It's all the same thing. Then we also have incarcerations and arrests and police systems in both countries. In both countries, Indigenous and Black people and people of color are incarcerated and arrested and held by police officers at a far more rate than any Caucasian. And it doesn't work, it doesn't quite line up with the actual like percentages that those people make of the population. You know, it's just way too skewed. And a lot of people like to excuse it away like, well, that's because those people are criminals. Okay. And again, another really multi-layered thing. Like, those people are not criminals. You think they're criminals and you treat them like criminals, so then they begin to act like criminals. Repeat after me. You think they're criminals, so you treat them like criminals, so they start to act like criminals. Okay? That's what happens. But then, on top of that, you think they're criminals, you assume they're criminals, so you arrest them. You think they're criminals, you assume they're criminals, so you beat them up. This is why this is happening. And then you bring in the fact that you put them in ghettos, you treat them like garbage, you keep them uneducated, you keep them poor, and then you wonder why they're doing criminal activity. Like, at some point, there has to be responsibility on the system and on that keeps white rich people in charge. Okay? At some point in time, we have to hold them accountable to it. Like, they're the reason this happens. You can't expect to suppress and oppress and oppress and push down and push down and push down and not have them suddenly just go, wow, what the fuck? Enough is enough. Because that's how I feel right now. That's why I'm putting myself out there right now. And I know I put myself out there, but doing it live like this is way harder. This took me a lot to even start. And because something that is often completely, I don't want to say ignored, because I don't even think it's on purpose. Like, it's not like you all are purposely ignoring, okay? But it's so covert, it's so built into our systems that we just normalized it, and we just expect that it's just normal. Like, well, that's how it's always been. It's normal. That's how. But when I make a post, and I know if you follow me on Facebook and Instagram, and in Facebook in particular, like, you'll know that I'm always posting about this stuff. About everything. Gay, like anything that's an injustice. But with any time that I come out to post, I put myself in front of a firing squad. And I do it knowingly, and I do it with purpose, but I will always have a racial backlash when I make posts. In order to be heard, I have to accept, and in order to start the conversation, and in order to encourage the conversation, I have to accept that I'm going to have to take some racial hits in order to do that. And I accept that, and I know it to be true. And you know, over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, as I've gotten more and more vocal about this stuff, I've been definitely, having to learn where my boundaries lie on that, and who is open to the conversation and who is not, and who am I going to fight and who am I not, and who am I going to get most hurt by and who am I not, you know? So sometimes I post things and I get a lot of responses, and then I realize to save myself, have to pull myself out of the conversation. So in those times, like, this is, again, if you're asking how can I help, and I fully understand that, and we're going to get into that part in a minute about just how racism isn't your fault, but like, in that moment in time, this is your opportunity to speak up. This is your opportunity to, and it doesn't have to be aggressive. You can just be course correcting your fellow white people, you know? Like, if I post something and somebody starts, you know, doing covert racism, and because you looked that up and you're really well versed in it now, you're able to recognize it, then I encourage you, and this isn't just me and because I'm your friend or you know me personally, I'm asking you to do this for everybody who's putting themselves out there to try to shine a light on this. And know that every time that any person of color or any LGBTQ does this, that they are 100% putting themselves in front of the firing squad. And you can help by being kind of like a shield for them. You can help them have their voice by being a shield for them. And you do this by, again, recognizing when they're under attack with the covert racism. Because here's something that I was meaning to say earlier about covert racism is the reason it's harder is because it's so veiled. Anytime that I have anytime that I have faced covert racism and been pushed to my brink and expressed something about it, it always comes down to somebody saying to me, "Oh, come on, Amber, calm down. It wasn't that big of a deal." Or, "Oh, calm down. That wasn't how I meant it." Or, "Oh, you're just being too sensitive," and all this stuff. And so it's actually a very unsafe racism for me. I can't stand up to it without actually being gaslighted. I can't stand up, like I said earlier, if an overt racist is saying really bad racial slurs towards me, and I'm in the mall and I start responding, everybody's going to have my back. But in covert racism, they're not. And the bystanders are almost always the ones to go to the defense of the person who's actually being racist towards me. And they're really quick to tell me to calm down. That's not what they meant. I must have misunderstood. And so it really isn't safe. It's not a safe place for me to be. The other thing about covert racism is the fact that it is so veiled. So it hides in my friends. It hides in the people who come into my salon. It hides in the population. I don't know it's there. And whereas like overt racism is pretty easy to see. And so I know not to become friends with it. I know to not go near it. I know I'm not safe there. So I know to keep my distance. But with covert racism, I have no idea to keep how to keep my distance. And so then that brings me to something else that I've been thinking about, which is clothing. And this sounds so weird, but I want to ask, if you're Caucasian, how many times do you consider what it is you're putting on before you leave your house? And I'm not saying like, am I looking cool? Am I looking sexy? Well, somebody, all the things that we all deal with just everyday society. But, and you're probably going, where is she going with this? Because I'm sure that this is something that you don't understand. But here, I'm going to explain it to you. So I'm wearing this hat today, and I'm wearing it because obviously I'm talking about my culture and whatever, and it's been an interesting conversation that I've had. But when I wear this hat in public, I have to prepare myself, because when I wear this hat, it's like a sign. I'm an Indigenous, and this adds safety for me, but it also creates unsafety for me. And let me explain to you both. When I wear this hat, this is when I will get followed in a store and racially profiled as if I'm stealing. My mother, my very white mother, was with me one day, and she watched that go down in Simons, which happens to be on a reserve in Canada, in West Vancouver. I wore this hat and I got racially profiled. When I wear this hat, that's when I get looked at when I walk in stores, as if I might shoplift. I also get way more wide berths. People walk past me. But again, this is sort of a safety thing, because this is where, so again, it's like I'm putting a target for racism in a way by wearing my culture. But at the same time, it's allowing me to see the covert racists a lot easier at the same time. So in a way, it creates safety for me, but it also makes me, and this is also because I'm light-skinned, so that's another topic. Being light-skinned means I blend, and blending means I don't experience racism like my cousins do. I have full-blood cousins, and they're darker skinned than I am, and they experience it way worse than I do because I blend, and I live in an urban center of Vancouver, so which is super multicultural, so people think I'm all kinds of different races. So with that comes racial guilt. I feel guilty that I have it easier in life because my skin is lighter. White people make me It is hard to reconcile being half white when the white people are your oppressor. It is hard to experience the privilege that light skin gives people in America. When I know what my grandparents went through, and when the territory that my ancestors have lived on for thousands of years is called the Highway of Tears. It is hard to be half white when Indigenous are really mad at white people. Because they take it out on my mom, and they take it out on us light-skinned Indigenous too. So, there's that. And I'm in no way saying like poor me and like as if that's worse than having darker skin, because it's not. It's just another layer of it all that I have to try to reconcile. So when you see all this oppression and you understand that we never agreed to any of this, that it wasn't something that as First Nations of Canada we said, yeah, let's all live together as one big happy family and then you can treat us like garbage. Like, no, sorry, that was not the agreement. And when slaves were released in the United States of America and slavery ended, there was a contract that was made between the United States of America and the Black people of America, and it was this: you will experience the same freedoms and rights that are written into our Constitution as every other American, and that has not been upheld. They have not experienced those same freedoms. They have not experienced the rights that are given to them as Americans. That is not what is happening for them. That contract has not been upheld by the United States of America. And same thing goes with Indigenous in Canada. We did not give you the right to cage us. We did not give you the right to take away education. We did not give you the right to take our culture. We did not give you the fucking right to steal my grandmother and my grandfather from their parents. We did not give you the right to make it so that I have to deal with the traumas of my father, or that I have to deal with the traumas that were inflicted on my father from his very traumatized parents. Because that is the reality of every single First Nations in North America. We are dealing and growing up with the traumas that were inflicted on our grandparents. And that is abuse that follows the family line. And it's very hard to get over. We're talking about alcohol abuse. We're talking about all kinds of things. And my time is running out. I guess I've been talking for a while. I don't know. I feel like I still have some more to say about white fragility and stuff. But I'm going to continue on another live, I guess. Is that what you guys want me to do? Anyways, we did not give them the right. And when you see violence and protesting and so forth, you have to remind yourself that this contract was broken. The government of Canada and the government of the United States of America did not uphold their side of the bargain. So I ask you this: if the laws of the land pertain to the governance of Canada and the United States of America, tell me why those laws need to be governing the Black people of America and the Indigenous of North America in a contract that was never upheld by the other side. And I'm going to leave you with that. And on my next live, which I'm going to go right now too, we're going to discuss a little bit more about white fragility, police fragility, and just a few more thoughts, I guess. So I hope you join me. I'll be right back.